Perfect Dark, when it was announced that there is a new entry in development at Microsoft, I was obviously pretty ecstatic. I grew up playing games like GoldenEye, and then Rare eventually took those mechanics, adapted it into a cyberpunk first-person shooter called Perfect Dark. And since the N64 days, Perfect Dark really hasn't been able to rise above that. It kind of peaked at N64. And so many people are hoping with the announcement of this new Perfect Dark game, which was revealed back in December 10th, 2020 during the 2020 Game Awards, that the Perfect Dark series will be able to make a comeback and show that there is more to this series than what it established back in the N64 days. But there is some trouble in paradise if this Video Games Chronicle report is anything to go by. This was published just yesterday on March 15th, 2022, and the headline reads, "Insiders describe Fast and Furious exits from Xbox's Perfect Dark studio." So a lot of developers working at The Initiative, which is a studio that Xbox acquired and is now under their umbrella and is the development studio behind Perfect Dark, were just not happy with their working conditions or the level of autonomy that they had, and they decided that they would pursue greener pastures outside the Perfect Dark development team. And it's bad enough that, according to Video Games Chronicle, roughly half of the initial core team has left in the last year. As much as half of the core development team known to be working on the upcoming Perfect Dark reboot quit the company during the last year, or around 36 people, analysis of employee LinkedIn profiles has revealed. And that includes most of the initiative's senior design team. So we're not just talking about lower level ground floor employees. We are talking about major influences of a development team, lead roles that have stepped down, and has just created this attrition at the company that doesn't seem particularly normal, especially when among those who left include the game director, Dan Neuberger, design director, Drew Murray, lead level designer, Chris O'Neill, principal world builder, Jolion Myers, 2 senior system designers, a group of 3 former God of War designers, and more. We are talking about senior roles, some of the most important positions where we've seen prominent and veteran developers decide that this is just not for them. And doesn't end there. Perfect Dark's 2 most senior writers also recently quit, along with the project's technical director, tech art director, lead gameplay engineer, lead animator, QA lead, and more. When so many people in such high-ranking and influential positions are quitting left and right, that really cannot be a good sign for the development cycle of a game. And I hope this doesn't, in the long term, end up indicative of a project that will launch in a rough and imperfect state. No pun intended. I hope this can be more of a setback that will no doubt internally delay the game, but at the very least will allow enough time for the studio to recover from this and ultimately ship a game that, despite troubled aspects of its early days of development, is able to deliver something compelling. But when signs like this start to crop up during this pivotal stage of the game's development, it tends to, at the very least, raise some flags that this game won't have the smoothest of launches. At least it leaves the possibility out there, even though we have seen other troubled projects kind of bring it together and ship something that was decent to good to, at times really good. So it's not impossible to come back from situations like this, but it certainly does raise concerns looking from the outside in. So where this leaves the initiative is that it now has less than 50 people, and it is currently advertising 3 roles on their website that needs to be filled. We can go to their website right now. You can see that they're hiring a franchise art director, and on the engineering department, they're hiring a senior AI engineer and developer operations engineer. Now, if you're wondering why they're hiring so few people given the amount of departures we've seen in the last year, that's because it seems more and more likely that Crystal Dynamics is going to be taking more charge of this project, whereas the initiative is going to be more of a supporting studio, and it seems like they're going to be taking more of a back seat, as the timing of the departures coincides with the September 2021 announcement that Crystal Dynamics has been signed to co-develop Perfect Dark. This is the studio that, under more positive light, is known for the Tomb Raider reboot series that has generally garnered positive reception. In a more negative light, it is known for the disastrous launch of Marvel's Avengers, one of the worst live service releases ever, which had the Avengers name behind it and yet still couldn't garner interest from the gaming audience because it was just such a generic, boring, and ultimately, for the long term, not all that fun live service that felt more like a trend chaser rather than a genre leader. So, when that was announced back in September 24th, 2001, that Xbox's Perfect Dark reboot will be co-developed by Avengers Crystal Dynamics, there were certainly mixed sentiments about that, though Perfect Dark seems to be less of a live service and more of that kind of single-player experience with perhaps some multiplayer components that we'd come to expect out of a game like this. And Crystal Dynamics is obviously better at those single-player types of experiences, so maybe Crystal Dynamics coming on board this type of project, the type of project that Perfect Dark isn't such a bad match, given that at least with the Tomb Raider series, they did fairly well. Hopefully Perfect Dark won't be a repeat of Marvel's Avengers. And it would seem as though part of the reason that Crystal Dynamics was brought on board is because the former game director Daniel Neuberger was also previously game director on the Tomb Raider series. He has involvement with Crystal Dynamics and so decided maybe for this project and the level of ambition that it was going for, it just needed some extra backup, and Crystal Dynamics got brought in as a co-developer. So less of like Crystal Dynamics will be supporting the studio and more like these two studios are going to come together and work on it together, though it does seem likely now that Crystal Dynamics has taken the lead more than the initiative, which is ironic given the initiative's name, as suggested here by Video Games Chronicle. This, referring to Crystal Dynamics being signed on to develop Perfect Dark, combined with a few job roles currently advertised at the initiative, suggests that the Tomb Raider developer is likely taking a much stronger lead than first thought on the project, meaning that a lot of those roles that need to be filled now, a lot of those big leadership positions will likely be filled by Crystal Dynamics employees and developers and staff. As for why so many folks over at the initiative quit throughout the past year, well, it had to do with a lack of autonomy or the sense that they weren't given enough creative freedom. Interviews with multiple former senior developers cited a lack of creative autonomy and slow development progress as the reason for their departures, and described the wave of exits as fast and furious, except this time it's really not about family. Bad joke. With project momentum said to be heavily affected, which goes to suggest that internal delays likely did happen and that the game will likely be out a good amount of time later than initially anticipated from the 2020 announcement. Now, when reached out for comment by VGC, the initiative's management relayed and tried to assure that everything's a-okay despite the turnaround of employees. This is what studio head Daryl Gallagher told VGC. We're really excited about all the progress we're seeing with our relationship with Crystal Dynamics. In this journey, it's not uncommon for there to be staffing changes, especially during a time of global upheaval over the last 2 years, and there is plenty more work in front of us to deliver a fantastic Perfect Dark experience to our players. We wish all our former colleagues the very best, and I'm confident in the team we have in place, the new talent joining, and we can't wait to share more with the fans. Look, I'm not saying that the new team in place isn't talented or that, they're incapable of delivering a solid game at the end of this journey, but I think this individual is definitely downplaying the severity of how much staff they've lost in such a short amount of time. They're saying, well, it isn't uncommon for there to be staffing changes. To a degree, yes, that's true, but such heavy losses from such high positions in just a year, like roughly half the initial team, like that does not feel normal at all. That feels like way too high of a turnaround of employees for it to feel like everything's normal in paradise. And the sad part is that even high rotation of game development staff isn't uncommon in the games industry because developers are so poorly treated. In the case of the initiative and the mass departure there, that seems to have had more to do with creative differences as well as just a lack of autonomy, a lack of communal creative kind of development. Instead, it was more of a top-down kind of deal, which was not what was initially advertised to folks who applied to work at this company and on this project. According to Video Games Chronicle sources, former Initiative developers VGC spoke to attributed the wave of departures to frustration among senior talent over the direction of the project set down by Gallagher and game director Daniel Neuberger, who himself left the company last month. The article then makes it a point to highlight that the Initiative's website claims and advertises that the company promotes a collaborative creative environment, and this is actually true. If you go to the website right now and scroll down here, you'll find valuing inclusivity and trust, we foster a collaborative, thoughtful, and self-aware environment where we continually strive to improve together. But that promise didn't really blend with studio head Gallagher's and game director Neuberger's management style. Unfortunately, they were used to the more top-down direction, wanted to make video games the way they always had, and many Initiative employees were expecting a more bottom-up approach because that's what was advertised. But instead, there was a lot of quarrel over the management style of Gallagher and Neuberger, which led to a lot of people deciding that they don't feel creatively fulfilled enough or creatively autonomous enough for them to feel like this is the right home for them. And so what all of this is culminated in is development progressing painfully slowly and a solid company culture never ultimately being formed. Though the one upside to all of this is that the publisher, Microsoft and Xbox, are being patient and lenient about this. All former employees VGC spoke to said that they were surprised at how lenient Microsoft had been over the lack of progress. Microsoft seems a lot more patient about the fact that they recently acquired a lot of these studios and they're going to need time to develop their culture. They're going to need time to be cultivated in the way that PlayStation studios, the reason they're able to make such high quality games consistently is that these studios have been fostered and they have been cultivated over a long period of time and they've found their groove, if you will. Microsoft still has to wait for many of these new acquisitions to find that, and Microsoft at the very least is being patient about that aspect. That will take some time, seeing more the long game. So hopefully that's something that will be retained. Now, on the topic of bad management, this is a quote that VGC managed to get from one of their sources. Making games is hard enough, let alone when you feel like you can't get through to people making the decisions that affect everyone. And what this seems to suggest to me is that this is definitely less of a Microsoft and Xbox publisher side of things issue, and this is more to do with clashes between the Initiative and Crystal Dynamics when they were brought in, disagreements between how leadership and management of studios like the Initiative are handling the management and making it top down instead of, from bottom up, which has led to a lot of disagreements internally, a lot of turmoil that has led to this team essentially needing a reboot with a lot of people leaving and being replaced now by Crystal Dynamics folks. Or as Video Games Chronicle puts it here, Crystal Dynamics' introduction is also now likely to plug the gaps left by the Initiative staff turnover. And this is a turnover so high that a lot of the sources that VGC spoke to suspect that they'd be surprised if Crystal Dynamics' introduction combined with the significant departures of core staff hadn't triggered an effective soft reboot of Perfect Dark, and that it was likely still years away from release. With how many people have left, especially with how many people in creative head positions have left, it doesn't seem unlikely that the vision of this Perfect Dark project has changed, and in turn, a soft reboot might have happened behind the scenes, though there's more speculation at this point. But a vision is defined by the group of people who come together to fulfill that vision, and when that group of people changes so much in such a short amount of time during such a pivotal time during the game's development, it seems likely that the vision will have changed along with that too, and that this will be a different game from whatever the original game director who left back in February had in mind. But yeah, the article closes with one more emphasis that it's understood that Xbox's leadership team are prepared to be patient with their new first-party teams as they prioritize assembling groups capable of regularly producing the kind of critically acclaimed prestige projects that come from PlayStation studios like Naughty Dog and Insomniac. So yeah, it's definitely good to see that Microsoft and Xbox are thinking long-term and are understanding of the fact that with some studios, it's going to take longer than others for their culture to kind of come together, for their groove to be found, and for them to adapt to this new environment of now being a part of the Microsoft Xbox umbrella and a part of this whole family of studios who will occasionally, cross here and there and will collaborate here and there. At the same time, it does seem like a lot of the original Initiative studio developers who were excited about Perfect Dark were not happy with what feels like a takeover. And I don't know what suddenly prompted the involvement of Crystal Dynamics, whether the project was struggling before then and Crystal Dynamics stepped in to help out, or if this was just a case of we probably have bigger ambitions than what the Initiative can afford to do with our current resources and manpower. We're going to need some help. And so Crystal Dynamics came over, and then the clashes began in terms of how management was handled and how a lot of people felt creative autonomy was stripped away. I don't know the exact order of events and the exact instigators of these events, but it's not necessarily good, certainly, to see this happen. To close things off, here's a list that Video Games Chronicle compiled showing members of the Perfect Dark development team and how many have remained versus how many have left. So we got, Daryl Gallagher, the studio head, is still on board, for example, and a couple of key people are on board right now. But you got Daniel Neuberger, game director, who left in February of 2022, just a month ago, really, among others like Drew Murray, design director, Chris O'Neill, lead level designer, you name it. I mean, a bunch of names, and you can see here where they were previously. So Daniel worked on the Tomb Raider series previously. Drew worked on Sunset Overdrive previously, so Insomniac. Chris here worked on God of War and Metal Gear Online. We got folks who worked on Jedi Fallen Order, Id Software, more God of War and Tomb Raider, Infinity Ward, The Coalition, Respawn, Infinity Ward, you name it. A bunch of people from a bunch of other studios came on board. It didn't quite work out. They left, decided to find a new home. But yeah, you can see like the turnover and just how many people left in the past year. It's not insubstantial. It is definitely disconcerting. Not necessarily the end of the world. There are some people out there who have been saying that the original Perfect Dark also had similar development troubles in terms of, high turnaround of developers at some point during its game's development. But in the end, the project came together. But at the same time, with how much more complex games have gotten lately, I feel like this kind of disruption can kind of lead to more long-term troubles and issues and problems. Though I hope that's just paranoia. I hope I'm not correct in assessing that this may indicate a troubled launch down the line, especially because Microsoft is being patient with the studio and really kind of trying to help them along. Maybe they can turn it around and maybe they can bring it back despite this initial bump. But this is information worth noting for those who are awaiting Perfect Dark. Know that there is a possibility that Trouble in Paradise might affect the quality of the game in the long term, as we have seen happen with other games in the past whose studios have had trouble retaining staff members and had seen disconcerting levels of turnaround for especially, veteran and senior positions, paired with poor management that culminated in that project launching in a very rushed and incomplete state. Hopefully Perfect Dark won't be another Anthem, and it'll make a behind-the-scenes comeback story. But we'll see what happens. Until then, this is kind of everything you need to know about what's going on with the Initiative and now Crystal Dynamics, who are both involved in this Perfect Dark project that seems more troubled than it should be or than we'd like it to be. But let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are. Do you share my concerns, or do you think this can all ultimately, in the long run, work out, especially with Microsoft and Xbox being patient and hopefully, being able to provide the support that this team needs? Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.